Hello, everybody. I'm here in my office in Bend, Oregon, and we're going to talk today about CBD and hemp. I've got some notes printed here, so I'll try not to just read a couple of quick things. If you have questions, I'll try to hit the questions in as we go. Also, you can always email me at b@dopecfo.com, and I get all those emails and reply to all of them. Also, be sure to stay to the end. We're going to drop a link in where you can get a ebook that is the Accountant's Guide to CBD and Hemp Accounting. And so we put a ton of effort into that. It's very valuable. Please stay to the end. All right, so we'll jump right into CBD hemp. A couple things came up this morning. We were talking about, I know all of you have your own business or want your own business as accountants, and so a couple of ideas along those lines. I have founded or owned or invested in literally hundreds of businesses in the last 20 years as CFO, CEO, and everything from retail, nonprofit, energy, Kickstarter funded, accounting, education, online, so many different types of companies. And so a couple things are just high level advice. We were discussing, a lot of you all are doing strategic plans for the year. Always do your expected case. That's your best plan, what you think is going to happen, both on revenues and expenses. But then also make sure you do a worst case. And so I was actually talking to my son about this with his business. And yeah, hope for the best and plan for the best, but plan for what happens in the worst case. So if things don't go like you expect, either on the income or expense side, you want to be prepared for that. So I think most of us know that advice, but really don't just plan for your expected scenarios, plan for the worst case. I also like to do best case. It's fun just to kind of look what would happen if everything went perfectly and sales were triple what you hoped they would be and expenses stayed the same. And that can be fun to do. It rarely happens, but fun to do. Secondarily, around that theme, if you are an accountant working in a big company or in public or whatever, and you want to have your own business, you're thinking long term, just make sure when you launch your own business, you want to pick a niche and you want to make sure it's a very, very good niche. If you do those two things right off the bat, that's kind of one decision you make going into your business that will be literally 25 to 30% of your long-term success. So if you make the wrong decision, picking the wrong niche or being a generalist, that will definitely cut down your successful efforts. So again, we're talking about CBD hemp today. It's more than a niche. It's a movement that's sweeping this country, as everybody knows, and the world. There's likely many, many medical benefits of CBD and hemp, and those are just now. Some of them have been around for a long, long time. People have been using both cannabis and CBD hemp for pain management for centuries, thousands of years. Finally, the mainstream medical field's coming around. That's why CBD hemp is now legal. Cannabis will probably follow soon. But anyway, it's a great niche. One thing I love about it, and I told my niece about this, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You know, niches of this size do not get born overnight in our lifetime. It is happening right this second. I'm super glad I got in. When I got in 2014 in Oregon, I thought, oh crap, I'm so late. There were many people that had been around for 5 years in Oregon, and I thought I was very, very late to the game, and now people consider me very early. So it's not too late to jump in. Since it is more than a niche, you can actually do more than just become an expert in that niche. You can actually be a participant. You can be involved both in grassroots organizations in your state and nationally. You'll meet tons of CEOs. All right, so that's enough of kind of the pitch around CBD hemp. The state of it right now, it is federally legal. It's also state legal in 46 states. So the good news is, right off the bat, it's federally legal, so we don't have that issue that we do have with cannabis, and it's everywhere, and it's exploding. So I think there's around 30 to 35,000 cannabis companies, and in just the last year alone, over 20,000 new CBD hemp companies have been formed, so it is likely to surpass cannabis pretty quickly. Still has major accounting issues around taxes, GAAP, cost accounting is needed, software issues. There's no software for the industry yet. Complicated accounting. You have 4 verticals: farming, retail, manufacturing, processing, and labs as well. So from the USDA site, on December 20th, 2018, hemp was removed from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, which means 280E no longer applies to hemp CBD, and that's good news from a tax perspective. Actually, CBD and hemp is now more complicated than cannabis, because if you are a farmer of cannabis, you can do cost accounting. It's still complicated figuring out cost of goods sold, but that is your only offset to income in the tax return. With CBD hemp, we'll get into some more differences on that as well. So both of the cannabis and hemp, you'll start with, at least on the IRS federal side. Nationally, doesn't matter what state you're in, you're going to fall under 471 of the tax code. 471-2 is valuation of inventories, lower of cost or market. 471-3 applies to retailers, dispensaries. There's many CBD stores coming online, so that section would apply to you, and that is where the cost of the product is going to be usually your invoice price plus transportation and other necessary costs to acquire goods. 471-11, that applies to cultivators and processors, which are both big in both cannabis and CBD hemp. And that's where the complicated cost accounting comes into play. There's many, many costs from utilities, labor, rent, what else? Insurance, all kinds of things. Raw materials that come into the cost of goods sold calculation. And so you want to make sure that you're doing that correctly for 471. Also, 471 says there's a category of costs that you can include in cost of goods sold if you're doing GAAP for inventory in your normal monthly financials. Most farmers are not doing this, so they're missing a tax deduction. So we want to make sure we help them do that. The good news for hemp and CBD is they are also open to using Section 263A. This allows for even more indirect costs to be put into cost of goods sold. And so generally we're trying to get as much cost into cost of goods sold, at least on the tax return side, so that we can lower gross income. Also for hemp CBD, once you have your gross income, you're also going to be able to deduct normal business expenses, and so you can pretty quickly get your income down pretty low for a tax perspective. So you definitely want to look at both of those codes when you're looking at this piece here. Let me see what else. So again, 263A would include more indirect labor, officers' compensation, employee benefits, licensing costs, service costs. So definitely more codes available there. Another area for hemp and CBD is you can apply the farm rules. So there's special farm tax rules. So it is hemp growing as farming, not producing. You can use Schedule F if filing 1040. And that allows you also, if your average sales are less than 25 million for the last 3 years, which most companies would fall under that, you can actually use cash accounting if you want. And so there's also an inventory exception for farming, which they're not required to maintain an inventory if the average annual gross receipts are less than 25 million. You can treat inventory as non-incidental materials and supplies, or account for it in the same manner as applicable financial statements. So you want to make sure you look at that. Of course, we know inventory is not going to be incidental, but if that is allowed, it may benefit some of your clients. So if on the cash side, a couple of the pros are you can bring expenses up quicker, you can defer revenue sometimes, and so not everyone will want to do that. Even if they want to look at that, you have other considerations as well. It may save you some tax dollars, at least in year one. But on the other hand, if you're using cash basis financials, there's other considerations. For one, you're not going to be able to run your business as well. It's harder to access capital if you have cash basis financial statements. It may make your audit trickier. We prefer to do accrual accounting, and then with most of our clients. Also, Section 199A and the QBI deduction under that was the new law back in 2017. So these are, if you have an LLC or a pass-through, you can get further deductions on your tax return, not available to cannabis, but it is available to hemp CBD. Now, we'll say one thing to hesitate around pass-throughs. There are some very beneficial laws and structures for C Corps now. So you may want to definitely always have your clients talk to an attorney about what structure, because we're not attorneys. But that said, C Corps now have a maximum tax rate of 21%. And a couple of things that really apply to both cannabis and CBD is you have these investors that may have many companies, they have other companies, they may be, successful in another business, and they invest in a cannabis or CBD LLC. Well, one issue with that is we're going to have lots of audits with the IRS in both those companies. And when the auditors audit the LLC or pass-through entity, they can expand their audit if they want to into the individual investors. So if they go to audit this farm and it's an LLC and they see Joe as an investor over here and like, wow, Joe's worth $50 million. He's got all these other companies. Why don't we go audit Joe's personal return? And so a lot of investors are not going to like that. And so they're going to prefer not to be audited or be even exposed to that liability. So that's a really important one to consider right off the bat. Secondly, if the IRS comes in and they find a big judgment and claim, that judgment can pass through the entity to individual owners personally. In a C Corp, it cannot. So if they audit a C Corp, if they find any liability, that stays in the C Corp. So even if that company were to go bankrupt, it doesn't affect any of the investors' other businesses, which is very important. Also, just if there is a liability found as well, that will stay within the C Corp. Oh, and a final thing with C Corp, if you do not distribute and this, a lot of times startups, and especially cannabis startups, which are short on money, or CBD hemp, will not make distributions donors, so you don't get hit with double tax. When the company does an exit in year 4 or 5, a lot of the capital gain can also potentially be deferred or eliminated under Section 1202. So really look closely at any of the lease selection. Make sure the tax attorney is looking at this, and not just, they may just have a corporate attorney who doesn't look at some of these things. So be very careful to look at that. Okay, hemp CBD outside of the tax law. So right off the bat, hemp CBD is a little bit more complicated than cannabis, because we're going to try to do gap accounting probably for both in the books. That's complicated because you have to do cost accounting. You need to have ways to collect operational data around all the different strains are growing, the yield per each strain, what % completion it is at each reporting date, and collect all this data so you can do cost accounting. So that's going to occur for both CBD and cannabis. But when you come over to the tax return, cannabis is just only getting cost of goods sold under Section 471. CBD and hemp is getting many more provisions of the tax code. It's way more complicated because you do have 199A, 263A, 471, farm accounting, cash accounting, much more complex, which brings up another point. We get a lot of questions on the cannabis side is, oh, what happens when cannabis comes off Schedule 1? They won't need us anymore. Nothing could be further from the truth. And we just saw that with CBD hemp. It came off Schedule 1, and what happened? It's even more complicated. And there's still a lack of accountants in the space. So, and then on top of that, and this will affect both as well, but right now CBD and hemp is very highly regulated outside of the tax code. And so right off the bat, you've got USDA, which is targeting and this is a little bit out of date. They were targeting to release their hemp regulations. They have released draft regulations, and they're not final yet. But USDA is going to oversee all hemp and CBD production. They're also looking at intellectual property issues. Can you patent a certain strain or whatnot? Those rules aren't final. And then under the next layer down, FDA, so Food and Drug Administration, they already regulate all the things we put in our body. So starting with medicines. So if you go to buy, you get the flu and go to your doctor and they prescribe an antibiotic, FDA is regulating that. Those have gone through years and years of testing and spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars before they can be brought to market because they have to comply with the FDA rules. Well, now that's going to hit CBD and maybe cannabis as well. If people are going to want to claim their medicines, they're going to have to go through all the phase 1 trials that normal medicines do. So there are going to be many companies, this will be over the next decade that this will play out, but they are going to regulate those rules. Now, they also regulate the food rules. So when you buy a loaf of bread and you look at the back of the loaf of bread and it says there's 10 grams carbohydrate, or maybe that loaf of bread is organic, or whatever else claims are made on that loaf of bread, those are regulated by FDA. I think most of us trust that someone's out there doing that right and really testing these people who make these claims. So we want the same thing with CBD and hemp. Right now, you can get CBD anywhere on the internet, everywhere. It is, since the regulations are so far behind, most of it's not tested. People are claiming all kinds of things that they shouldn't be on their products. Buyer beware. They've already done many tests where they pull the feds have pulled random products from wherever, online stores, 90% of the time or more, whatever they say is in that product, whether they say is 10% CBD, they're finding that is not true, that usually it's way less CBD than they claim. They're also finding, there's not supposed to be cannabis at all in CBD products. They are finding cannabis in CBD products. So you have to be very, very careful on what products you buy and even knowing what you're getting, because you basically don't know what you're getting at this point. And so if you say, oh, I tried the CBD lotion and it's great, may or may not even be CBD. Could be the placebo effect working on you, which, by the way, is a real psychological, it's not just an effect, it's a real thing. It actually does affect us, and we can heal our own selves with that effect. It's been proven. So anyway, be careful on that. EPA is also overseeing farming. They review all the pesticide applications. And then if you aren't tired of all the rules by that point, every single state has their entire rule book. Usually they're around 100 pages of every last thing you've got to do to comply with the state rules. And that could be everything from security cameras to how tall your fence has to be to how you can grow it, and many, many rules that you need to know. And even under that, you'll have county and city rules. So the rules do not end. We have seen many people make a lot of money by adding this to your practice. And so it's not actually that difficult. It's tedious and time consuming, but if you're serving cannabis or CBD hemp clients and you want to say, hey, I will help you with your state compliance, I will help you with your USDA compliance. It's just downloading that knowledge, reading it. It's all out there on the internet. You can help them. CEOs absolutely hate this stuff. So everything from HR, compliance, state rules, any of that stuff that sounds like compliance or insurance, CEOs hate. You can charge them a bunch of money for that. So that's a summary of most of the rules. What does this all mean? There's more tax deductions for hemp CBD companies, plus they're everywhere. And it opens up some new states. So you think of the whole South where cannabis isn't fully integrated yet, especially huge states like Texas and Florida that have tons of farmland. You're going to see a lot of hemp CBD companies, huge opportunity down there. Additionally, THC companies are realizing they can add CBD and hemp lines of business as a sizable non-cannabis division. That's always been an issue with cannabis companies. It was difficult to have a big non-cannabis division. They would all have a t-shirt and coffee cup and bong division, but those wouldn't be very high dollar sales, and so it was very hard to utilize those in a tax way. This industry is still massively underserved by accountants, bookkeepers, and CPAs, and enrolled agents, and CFOs. Whatever your skill set, if you get in now, you are getting in way ahead of the curve. You have complex GAAP and tax accounting, record keeping. The average mom and pop business in this industry is multi-million dollars, whether it's a farm, a processor, a retailer, they're multi-million. That means they can pay and should pay big fees. Generally, an average multi-million dollar client should be paying anywhere from 100 to 300 grand a year or more from start to finish, bookkeeping through tax. And so these are great clients. I have clients like this. My students have clients like this. They're not hard to get. And that's one of the beauties of this. THC is huge right now. Some predictions of hemp CBD are 5 times THC, and it's legal now. So that's kind of the highlights of it. I think I've answered all the questions. Someone asked about 263A. Yes, you can Google that, and Google 471 as well and 263A, and it will list real clearly what all those rules are as a starting point. And then again, we are going to drop this link in. Can we go ahead and drop the link in here to download your free guide to cannabis, or not to cannabis. This guide is going to be for CBD and hemp accounting, and we will hopefully, Amara will upload this link here in a second. Let me see if I got any more notes. We talked about 199A. And while Amara is dropping this link in, I'll briefly talk about that. So 199A is super complex, and there is no, people ask me a lot of times, like, or CEOs ask me, what's the answer for this question or that question on a tax? What should I do entity-wise or whatever? And so, okay, here is the link right there coming through. But again, on 199A, there is no answer. So we could have a cannabis company, and we had this exact situation. It was a retailer with a farm in Portland. They had one investor that lived in Mexico. They had a couple other that lived in other various states, and each investor had all kinds of different businesses and LLCs, and they all invested in this one LLC. Well, they all have a totally different tax situation. So the 199A rules may apply to one way and to another way. And so it really gets down to that level. So again, here is this bit.ly link to our WYG0R. And thanks everyone for joining us today.